So, are you in the midst of getting a divorce and just feeling like you're never going to reach an agreement? Or maybe you have friends or family who are getting divorced and you're just thinking this is going so poorly. So, in this video, I'm going to share with you some best practices on how you can negotiate a settlement that meets your interests and that also allows you and your spouse to move on with your life. I want to start first by just acknowledging how painful divorce can be for yourself, your spouse, your family, and also your friends. This is a really, really hard time in life. One of the things I always say when I'm mediating a couple in the throes of a divorce is that often what we're seeing is really, really good people at their very, very worst. So the advice I'm going to give you is going to feel kind of really rational and maybe a little bit hard to hear, but I hope it will center you and give you some tips that can help you through this really, really hard period. So the first important piece is to conduct what I call an interest audit. So what is an interest audit? It's really a time where you're thinking about your own short and long-term interests. And I really separate out short-term and long-term interests because sometimes the short and the long-term are in conflict. So for example, to the degree that the entire proceeding and process is really painful, one of your interests are to have it end, to maybe be done with the other person. Maybe it's even to inflict some pain or punishment on them. But often those interests are in conflict with some longer-term ones. So for example, one of your long-term interests might be to ensure that you can pay for yourself and for your children, or maybe your children's education. So financial stability, or a working relationship with your spouse if there are kids in the marriage. By really spending time identifying both the short and the long term, we have some sense of how to balance some of the trade-offs. So I have seen situations where somebody who is in so much pain and wants everything to end as soon as possible ends up accepting an offer that is way less than what they deserve and not enough to meet their long-term goals. Similarly, I have seen situations where someone's short-term interest, which is to really make their spouse pay, is so high that they impose some incredibly painful condition on the other partner. But then the ability to work with that partner around childcare or custody or joint decisions around schooling is completely shot. So making this interest audit with short and long-term interests, right, then helps you prioritize and see the bigger picture. Second, if it's possible, sit down with your partner and discuss the interests, the ones that are shared between you. This may be hard to do, but if you can do this, I think that what you'll see, and this has been my experience, right? People think of a divorce as all about a dispute and conflict, but actually embedded in most divorces are a lot of shared interests. And once we understand the shared interests, it gives us a possibility to actually create some value to almost turn this painful dispute into some kind of problem-solving deal. Let me say something about the second piece, because the second piece can be really hard to do on your own. And this is when you might think about bringing in a mediator. So a mediator, someone like myself, a third party who does not have an interest in the substantive outcome, but does work as a neutral with the parties to help them resolve their dispute, in this case, the divorce. And a mediator can be really useful in a moment like this. Related to this is the third step, which is signaling a willingness to arrive at a fair outcome with your partner. This sounds really easy to do, but actually is challenging because what I often hear is a spouse saying, I want something fair, but I think that they're out to get me. And if I signal my interest in fairness too soon, the other side will use that and then take advantage of me. So I need to show that I'm strong and willing to fight. What's hard about that is then you have two parties who actually in their heart of hearts want something fair, but they both signal this desire to fight. And what we end up with is protracted and costly litigation. So what are some ways to signal that willingness to arrive at a fair outcome? Well, one of them is possibly suggesting a mediator. But there are also interesting creative other ideas. So for example, there's a movement in the United States called collaborative lawyering. Collaborative lawyers are lawyers who are trained in interest-based problem-solving negotiation, the kind of negotiation that I talk about on this channel. And the way this works is if you hire a collaborative lawyer and your partner hires a collaborative lawyer, both sides agree that these lawyers will only be used to negotiate an outcome, meaning that if the case needs to go to a court or a judge, neither lawyer will be representing either of the spouses. You will both have to go back and find new lawyers. And the idea here, right, it's a very credible signal from both spouses of their commitment to really focus on interests instead of positions and to arrive at a mutually acceptable, value-creating, and fair outcome. Fourth, find some ways to manage and acknowledge your own strong emotions. A real way to ensure that the negotiation with your spouse will not go well is to pretend that you don't have complicated, strong, and hard to handle feelings. Almost always a divorce is gut-wrenching and painful, even if you're the one initiating it. So finding ways to manage these emotions means really acknowledging and owning them. How can you do this? Well, first to yourself. So Matthew Lieberman at UCLA, he and his colleagues have done some work that has shown that when people name their own emotions honestly to themselves, he calls this affective labeling, that it actually reduces the likelihood that those emotions will come out in unproductive ways in a communication or negotiation. But in addition to that, it may be helpful to find a counselor or a community of friends or some loved ones who can really serve as active listeners and help you work through that pain. In addition, if you've hired a mediator, although they are not a therapist or a counselor, can often help you work through your own strong emotions. Of course, you're not the only one who has strong emotions. The fifth important step here is to develop strategies for handling their emotions. Now, let me be clear. It is not your job to make their emotions go away or to take care of them. By dint of the fact that you're going through a divorce, your caretaking of them is over. However, it is very possible that the way their emotions are coming out in the negotiation will be through anger directed at you, attributions of intentionality directed at you, passive-aggressive behavior directed at you, and you need to have some strategies for handling that. One important piece here is that when the other side, when your spouse is blaming you or characterizing you in negative ways, you need to see those characterizations and blame as emotions that they're having that are not being handled well. So if your partner is saying, you're the one who let this marriage fail, or you're the one who was unfaithful, or you're the one who didn't do their share, the strategy here is to hear that as a marker for their feelings and don't fight back. Don't say, oh no, I did more than 50%. Instead, to say, from your perspective, it seems like you really feel like I didn't pull my share in this marriage. And they'll be like, you sure didn't. And then the thing to say is, so you were really disappointed. Almost always the second time you do that, they calm down and stop saying it. So a strategy for handling their strong emotions is listening for these attributions, seeing them as markers for feelings, and then acknowledging the feelings back. So it's a form of active listening. The last important step, so easy to say and so hard to do, but it's the doctor's number one rule, and it should be your number one rule if you're negotiating in a divorce, and it's to strive to do no harm. So in a moment when you're really angry with them, where you feel like you have had it and you want to lash out, that is a moment to take a step back, to name to yourself the dynamic that's going on and then to not do that destructive thing. So it might mean taking a break. It might mean having some kind of a safe word to say we need to meet another time. It might mean calling up that counselor or friend or loved one. But what you don't want to do in that moment is lash out, because that will make it worse. The truth of the matter is that negotiating an end to a marriage is extremely complicated because in addition to the legal issues and the substantive issues ranging from disposition of the marital home, dealing with joint assets, dealing with alimony, dealing with child care and custody, are a whole host of emotions that both sides are feeling. In addition to the emotions are identity issues that are going on. What does it mean to me to be ending this lifelong partnership? So the more you can focus on really careful planning, the better the outcome will be for yourself, for your spouse, and for the others in your life who are affected by this. 6 steps to follow. First, conduct an interest audit, focusing on both long and short-term interests. Secondly, work with your partner to identify shared interests between you. This might involve hiring a mediator. Third, signal a willingness to arrive at a fair outcome rather than simply one that takes advantage of the other side. Fourth, find effective ways to both manage and acknowledge your own strong feelings as they come up in these negotiations. Fifth, develop some strategies for handling their emotions, especially if they're not as skillful as you might prefer. And lastly, strive to do no harm. If you want to learn more on how to be effective in communication, watch this next video, which is what are good communication skills in a relationship. Also, I'd be really grateful if you could subscribe to my channel. Please like this video and of course, ring the bell so you'll never miss a new video from me. Thanks so much. Okay, you know you want to improve your relationship skills. Keep watching.